Goddesses as Feminine Personifications of the Self, a lecture by Caroline Stevens, presented by the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago on February 29, 1984.
We've met for 5 weeks, this will be the 5th, to ponder and to celebrate our diversity and our oneness. We are each in ourselves diverse and rich in possibility, in harmony and in conflict, and we're diverse from one another. But our diversity flows from and reveals and comprises the one that we are, the oneness that we make here together, the great round of being and becoming in which we participate. Now, both psychology and religion discover that we are held and enabled by a power beyond the personal, the more than human source. And both psychology and religion try to clear away the obstacles to our experience of that more than personal. And at their best, both psychology and religion clear away obstacles to our awareness of our diverse selves. They promote the freedom and the strength and the ability to act and to love. Abilities which flow, I think, only from a confident freedom to be what we are, authentically. Both the fearful need to defend identity and the out-of-balance, desperate seeking to have identity conferred upon us afflict us, each in our way. They poison our love. They paralyze our wills. And psychologies and religions try in their various ways to return us to ourselves and to our source in freedom. Now, I'm going to be talking to you tonight primarily as a student of psychology, but also as a lover of the source of my life. I'm not a member of a religious collective, any organized or recognized community of religious practice and belief. For a variety of reasons, that's not currently my way. But I share with those of you who are so identified that love that I mentioned and something else, the struggle to understand myself, my way, in terms of a meaning system which I value, but which I find doesn't do entire justice to my experience of myself, of other women, or of men. And of course, the meaning system I'm talking about is Jungian psychology. Now, I'm concerned tonight with human identity, with its source, first to ponder and then to celebrate. First theory, and then the evocation of images. For I'm convinced that both images and words, the words we use to understand the images, the stories we tell, the theories we spin about the gods and about ourselves, have the power to free us or to constrain us, good evening, to cripple us or to enable them. And I think we do well to attend both to theory and to image. Now, a lot of what you're going to hear tonight is my current effort to clarify my thinking. And as difficult as that is for me, it may prove even more difficult for you guys. I want you to stop me if I'm not being clear, because that, again, will help me clarify my thinking. And I'll try and have us a discussion period at the end of the thinking part before we move to the images. Now, a quote from the father to begin with, Jung. This is one of his favorite things, one of my favorite things that he has said. Reality is simply what works in a human soul, and not what is assumed by certain people to work there, and about which prejudiced generalizations are wont to be made. That has been, along with a lot else that I have read in Jung or into Jung, my license for attending first to experience and then attempting to rethink my understanding of Jungian psychology in terms that fit it, in terms that work in my soul or in the souls of analysans. And I have lately come to believe that a person's self-identification with masculine or feminine gender is fundamental to personal identity and to its flowering in the individuation process. Now, that doesn't sound like a terribly revolutionary statement, but And for most of our history, it's been taken for granted. But lately, this centrality of gender identity has been regarded by some as oppressive and incorrect. And they suggest that gender is only a function of social conditioning, and it's a cultural contrivance which may work to simplify social relations, but at the cost of individual growth. Sex is admitted as a biological reality. Gender is a matter of learned role behaviors, and either may be altered in the service of what is felt to be an authentic life. Jungians, however, talk about androgyny, and by that they suggest that gender is a psychological reality, that it's distinguishable. We can talk about it in ways that distinguish it both from body and from social conditioning, and that this reality is governed by archetypes. I'll have a little more to say about archetypes pretty soon. The importance of personal gender identity is admitted, but it's said to be centered largely in the consciousness of the person and to be developed and lived out in the first half of life. And it's believed that wholeness eventually requires the development of a contrasexual potential, which has been resident up till then in the unconscious. That is, the view is each of us is compounded of both genders. In what degree of each and in what relation, creative, constructive, or merely combative, is to be discovered and improved upon in the process of individuation. And of course, if gender is a psychological reality, and our cultural definitions of what is feminine and what is masculine are said to be archetypally grounded, then to affirm androgyny is to affirm full human potential in each of us. And it has been a freeing point of view. Analytic work on its basis has allowed people to open their awareness to aspects of themselves, capacities that are alive in them but have been denied approved expression by the collective. A woman might say to herself, in effect, well, so I have a masculine capacity for clear thinking or enterprise. Still, I'm a true woman, and I have an obligation to give this other in me an adequate form of expression in the world. A sense of oppression would lift. The dreams would reveal an altering relationship between ego and animus, and life in the outer world would proceed with new energy and along new paths. However, even among Jungians, audiences, analysans, and analysts alike, there persists a tendency to, quote, confuse gender with sex, and the prescriptions for appropriate feminine attitudes and behaviors, the definition of feminine identity in women, tend to reappear. Thus, in a generally inspired and insightful recent work, Marion Woodman, Addiction to Perfection, Marion asserts the distinction between sex and gender early on. That distinction, which is fundamental to a belief in androgyny, but is found a few pages later asserting that Lady Macbeth's crimes, I don't know how many of you have read this book, and Lord Macbeth as well, were the result of her sacrifice of, quote, the feminine principle of love, of her failure to fulfill her, quote, feminine role in relation to her man. It said that her masculinity burned out her femininity, and that her power concerns were alien to her feminine identity. I think it isn't easy, and I really come to believe that's a mistake to try to separate gender from sex intellectually. It doesn't work. I think gender identity, as I said, is a fundamental reality, and it's fundamental in a way which transcends ego adaptations. And that identity is itself grounded in the archetypal realm where psyche and soma arise together. Human identity is embodied. And the attempt to divide psychological gender from sex does violence to both. The move may free us from cultural stereotyping for a time, but then we confront deeper questions. What archetype, if any, shall predominate in a given situation? How do we balance the masculine and the feminine? Is gender identity only a matter of ego's reaction to anatomy or the influence of external others? Or is there a deeper source in psyche which supports it? Does the archetype of the feminine guide a woman's development, properly predominate in her psyche, and, if unimpeded, provide her goals and supply the strength to pursue them? In other words, is there a feminine self? Big F. Now, regarding that concept, self, a lot of people have noted that Jung's use of that term, although it always connotes wholeness and implies a power which somehow transcends the personal, doesn't clearly discriminate between personal and transpersonal, even cosmic reality. Jung himself insisted that the self, this is a quote, must remain a borderline concept, expressing a reality to which no limits can be set. He chose the term, he says, because it is definite enough to convey the essence of human wholeness, and on the other hand, indefinite enough to express the indescribable and indeterminable nature of this wholeness. Moreover, he said it would be wildly arbitrary and therefore unscientific to restrict the self to the limits of the individual psyche. He says it's easy enough to say self, but what exactly we have said remains shrouded in metaphysical darkness. Now, this borderline concept, which Jung points out is shrouded in metaphysical darkness, is the core concept in Jungian theory. It names the force which guides and empowers individuation. The indefiniteness of the concept, I think, is not only true to the reality it attempts to denote, but it's also essential to its clinical effectiveness, because it permits us to validate the emergence of an individual's unique potential, whether or not it might have been forecast by the collective or acceptable to the collective. And it warrants us to give full value to the actual symbols and behavior of the analysan. Now, this is a little bit of an aside, but it's also relevant. Although it's important to emphasize that we can't delimit the concept or define in advance our expectations with regard to an individual, it remains the case that no individual life will encompass the whole of human potential. Individuation leads to a specific wholeness. We're very fond of talking about wholeness, and we sometimes forget specific is also a very important part of this, the meaning of individuation. The mandala, which expresses a personal wholeness, Jung said, includes an indefinitely large segment of the collective unconscious. A certain number of the archetypes are included, permanently or temporarily. He says that psychologically the totality of the individual can be described as an almost arbitrarily circumscribed area of the collective unconscious. It's as if parts of the collective unconscious were selected by an unknown agency, which we would place at the center, a sort of living monad which takes its choice of elements that really belong to the collective unconscious and were not originally separated from its other contents by a magic circle. But, he says, through individuation, it seems as if such a magic circle were actually produced. Certain things are drawn from the infinite possibilities and given a home in a given individual. He says it's just the choice, the special choice of contents that produces the individual. And he warns against the perfect nonsense of assuming that you contain the world because you see it. Now, today, our knowledge of myths and myth-making enables us to see a bewildering profusion of semblances for that obscure thing we call the self. At its most inclusive, the self contains and harmonizes all conceivable opposites. And we have therefore sometimes seen the self as half male, half female, androgynous. Now, because they constitute the most fundamental division of humanity into kinds, the two sexes have served as convenient images for every sort of two-ness. Every polarity we conceive or encounter, including down and up, light and dark, good and bad. Now, although it's no longer possible consciously to consider women the source and embodiment of evil, and the contrary move by some contemporary women is easily seen to be as suspect, the tendency to sort all human capacities into the two great categories remains. And I think it's only slightly more sophisticated when we call those categories masculine and feminine rather than male and female. I think that we're too concrete with the image, too abstract with ourselves, when we imagine this symbolic appearance of wholeness, the androgyne, to apply literally to the individual psychological wholeness of a woman or of a man. Well, we can talk about that a little bit if you want to. I like that. When it dawned on me, I thought, yeah, that's it. That's it. All of it?
No, just that.
Okay. And the images of the androgyne turn up, around the world, different religious orientations. Half female, half male. And Jung pointed to that, and the people who talk about androgyny nowadays in the Jungian and other literature suggest that this is a literal reality, that, in fact, each human being is half, or at least some proportion feminine and an almost equal proportion masculine, or the other way around. It's never stated real clearly what the proportion might be. But the suggestion is a kind of a half and half thing. Again, Marion said that the balancing of the masculine and the feminine is the whole point of individuation. How do you do that? So, I'm suggesting that this image is an image of wholeness, but it is not to be taken literally as applying to the reality that you or I experience about our individual identities, our individual realities. That, as a matter of fact, it is. Yeah, that's another way to put it. Mm-hmm.
We'll be starting to see that maybe that, again, it is a literally primitive way. We take an image of a man and we take an image of a woman, we put it in half, pump it together. That we haven't gotten beyond that kind of primitive imaging, that there could be not necessarily amorphous, but a richer way of somehow
that's what I'm hoping.
Into that imagery, because that is a very primitive, without being pejorative about it, a simplistic way of depicting it.
If we take it literally.
And I keep seeing it, even from very sophisticated people, including myself, and you really sparked something when you said that.
Okay,
I've it's like we're kind of stuck in that kind of image.
Good, I'm glad you, okay, I'll,
I was just thinking the difference between the word image and the word symbol. The symbol has simplicity to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily naive or as simple as...
It's only naive if you say, if you take it literally. Then all of a sudden it's not a symbol anymore, it's a sign.
Or an image.
Yeah, and we have reduced the richness of the possibility a great deal. Okay, now, if we imagine for a minute, however, that our wholeness, we don't want to let go of that, does not lie in a literal half and half kind of psychological androgyny, how are we to imagine it? Now, it seems to me that it lies in a recognition of a feminine self or a masculine self and selfhood, which in itself opens to undetermined possibility. Those qualities which Jung pointed to as belonging to the self belong to the feminine self, belong to the masculine self. And again, within the magic circle of a given soul, only some of these human possibilities will appear, but all those which are drawn into manifestation will bear the imprint of the goddess or of the god, will be specifically masculine or feminine appearances and expressions of these common possibilities. It's as though the great gendered divinities, archetypes of the feminine and the masculine, stand at the gateway between the possible and the manifest. And the goddess for her daughters, the god for his sons, mediate the appearance in us of the qualities we are to embody in this world. And each of these deities is capable of manifesting the qualities which we have named and assigned to one or the other. There are gods, as there are goddesses, of love, of earth, of chthonic darkness. There are goddesses, as there are gods, of war, of learning, of light and order. These qualities and attributes do not belong to the masculine or the feminine. Their appearances in one or another form are functions rather of our time and place and capacity for discernment. Jung said, every force and every phenomenon is a special form of energy. Form is both an image and a mode of manifestation. It expresses two things, the energy which takes shape in it and the medium in which that energy appears. I am therefore of the opinion, he said, that in general, psychic energy creates the God image by making use of archetypal patterns, and that man, in consequence, worships the psychic force he experiences within him as something divine. Or, as Tozuki Shange, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, as she exults, I have found God in myself, and I loved her. I loved her fiercely. Now, many indeed and various are the God images which men and women have created over the ages around the world. But in every case, the high gods and goddesses of a given culture display in their attributes and activities the dominant image of creation, of our place in it, of good and evil, and of the possible and appropriate behavior of human beings. In all personifications of the divine, the attributes of gender are also displayed, and in them a culture understands the characteristics of human femininity and masculinity, and the relation between them. We identify ourselves in the deities and in relation to the deities. Thus, the image of a deity which works in us for the most part unexamined is heavy with consequences for our psychological and social well-being, is, as Jung said, the overwhelming psychic factor. And I may add, I think this is true whether or not one is a believer. The image is there, it's in the culture. Indeed, Jung suggests that the destruction of the God image is followed by the annulment of the human personality. That's a very strong statement. It's safe to assume, whether we go that far or not, it's safe to assume that limitations in our image of God will work as limitations on the flowering of human possibility. It's safe to assume that. And in the West, we learn that we are made in the image of God, and that the God that we image is the only God. We do well then to attend to that image and to its consequences. Jung also said that the self can't be distinguished from an archetypal God image. Since man knows himself only as an ego, and the self as a totality is indescribable and indistinguishable from a God image, self-realization amounts to God's incarnation. But the symbols of the self arise in the depths of the body, and they express its materiality every bit as much as the structure of the perceiving consciousness. And that materiality is sexed, down to the level of the individual cell and the hormonal compounds which predominate in a female or male body. I can go into the biology or physiology of it more fully if you want to, if we've got time. Because biology, the physiology of the body, is one of the things also that people who talk about androgyny point to sometimes. Anyway, these hormonal compounds, these workings in the individual cell, are the means by which a pre-gender energy is given its special human form in our world. And I think that's the level of organization at which the gendered archetype of the self arises. Finding its way to consciousness, it may inspire our awe and love. It may also become the basis of a religion, of ordering cultural preconceptions and the institutions based on them. That is, Western patriarchy has been one attempt to express and elaborate the archetypal reality of male mind-body on a societal scale. Harmony attained, appropriate choices ensured, development empowered by the predominance of the masculine. Now, our central archetype, our God image, is a creator sky god. In Christianity, a father incarnate through his son, the Logos. And the harmony attained, where it has prevailed, has been at the cost of possibilities and inclinations not adequately represented in that image, not adequately represented by an omniscient, omnipotent, sky-dwelling father. All that does not appear in such an image, the round of earthly life and death, the ambiguities of subjective understanding, the patient necessities and the passionate joys and desolations of physical and emotional intimacy. All these have been imagined as belonging to the feminine. Moreover, which by and large is also excluded from that image, moreover, the acknowledgement of weakness, uncertainty, dependent need have been allowed, encouraged in women, decried in men as feminine inadequacies. So that masculine religion and masculine psychology have offered two possibilities to women. The acknowledgement of their femininity, regarded among other, maybe more positive but still limiting descriptions as, this is a quote from Emma Young, less valuable, weak, passive, subjective, illogical, bound to nature. Acceptance of their femininity as meaning that, or its transcendence through animus-directed or possessed spirituality. Now, Jungian interpretations of the feminine and the masculine have remained for the most part those which are traditional to our society. The feminine is or is closely associated with eros, with matter in its Newtonian image, and with the unconscious. With the eros aspect is imagined a feminine monopoly on the skills and concerns of relationship. As materia, the feminine is passive, instinctual, opaque. And as the unconscious, chaotic, fecund, dark, and dangerous. Its light is lunar, changeable, mysterious, enchanting, ambiguous. And all of this is neatly opposed to the masculine, identified with active spirit, lawful order, and the conscious clarity of sunlit reason. The feminine may be transformative, as Neumann has it, for it inspires and nurtures. The masculine creates and commands. Now, as Jungians, we often rest these identifications on, again, on archetypes, which are living psychic forces which preform and continually influence our thoughts and feelings. And such indeed is the power of a central archetype that we are in danger of overlooking a distinction which Jung himself made, the distinction between an archetype and its image. Now, as imagined by Jung, archetypes are as consistent and unchanging as human nature itself. He says if they ever originated, their origins must have coincided at least with the beginning of the species. Now, these archetypes are revealed in patterns of human functioning and expressed in the products of creative fantasy, taken up and preserved in fairy tale, myth, and religion. But these revelations are not themselves the archetype. The archetype in itself is empty and purely formal, a possibility of representation. As the archetype approaches consciousness, it clothes itself in the garments of time and place. A primordial image is determined as to its content only when it has become conscious, and is therefore filled out with the material of conscious experience. Now, if we keep this in mind, we will be cautioned against the assumption that any given archetypal image, as we experience it or apprehend it, is complete, eternal, and innate. And the more powerful the archetype in its scope and significance for the understanding of human potential, the more conscious and careful must be the distinction between the eternal possibility and the historically conditioned image. Now, a lot of you who are theologians or interested in theology have been working to open up the conception of deity as it's come to us. But it remains so far the case that the most fundamental and powerful such archetypes are the archetypes of gender, and that our one God, our central archetype, is gendered and masculine. In other words, I'm saying that unless we look beneath the image of deity, unless we question the assumptions that come to us about what is masculine and feminine out of this central archetypal image as it's been handed down to us, our possibilities are going to be stunted, both men's and women's. But the reality which a creator sky god is a partial image of is just that. The reality goes beyond that. The reality encompasses very much more, and that we need to look under the image or open ourselves to the power beneath the image in order to become aware of the more and the other. Now, I'm also, of course, saying that the absence of feminine images of deity have rendered women less creative and less powerful and less confident in their... Okay, I've got one more page of this kind of stuff. I want to say that other images of deity have emerged, continue to emerge, but maybe without our recognition that that's what we're experiencing, throughout history, prehistory, around the world. And these are images which express the fundamental power and mystery of a feminine self. In Western patriarchy, these images have spoken for the most part directly to the unconscious, through and past a language and ritual and dogma created by and for a masculine expression of deity. In Christian symbolism, the Grail, the communion chalice, the baptismal font, the transformation symbolism of the Mass, and the seasonal holy days, the waxing and waning prominence of female saints and of Mary, all of these have reserved symbolically a sacred feminine presence, which was too often consciously repressed and denied, and which was in any case always overtly secondary and contained within masculine structures of understanding and enactment. Now, this containment of the powers and perceptions of one gender within another's may be precisely what made the emergence of patriarchy and patriarchal religion a kind of evolutionary necessity. When men like Neumann, for instance, speak of the goddess, they make repeated note of the position of the, quote, engendering male principle in the feminine, of a masculine procreative principle that remains subordinated to the feminine in which it operates. This fundamental constellation, says Neumann, forms the basis of the relation between the Great Mother and the Son Lover. Now, there is no freedom for the masculine in this situation. He serves the mother, and of course the human race in the process, but he's reduced to his function as fecundator. He must be forever young, dying, and reborn. There is no growing into conscious power and wisdom of independent maturity. He doesn't exist in his own right. He is not the agent of his own destiny. He is dependent upon the feminine for his identity. His masculinity, quote, remains estranged from him and not properly his own. Now, when we encounter men with this kind of constellation, in analytical work, we talk about being a prisoner of the mother complex. And a lot of the work is to free them from that. But this situation in reverse is true for a feminine which is contained and defined by the masculine. And if you were to reread those descriptions that I made and put in feminine and father or male, you would be hearing a lot of the complaints that are made today by feminists. Being defined by your reproductive function, being a sex object, being infantilized and rendered childlike, and so forth. And I think that has been the pressure of the patriarchy upon feminine reality. I think that to some degree, and for some of us more than others, maturity of a kind is attained in spite of it. But I think that a lot of crippling has been done and continues to be done by this estrangement from images of feminine creative power. And I think that we've gotten to a situation where this feminine estrangement from self is more and more apparent and less endurable. And the challenge that we face is that the reemergence, which I think is inevitable in some form, of feminine strength and power and self-recognition and self-determination shall succeed without denying or subsuming those qualities in men. In other words, that we don't just have what we call an enantiodromia, a flip over. The imagining is that we began in the mother goddess, and that the cultures that grew up in those days featured this kind of relation between feminine and masculine. Clearly, we don't really experience the reverse of that in patriarchy. Thesis and antithesis, and now I wonder, can we produce a synthesis? That's what I think that most of us are working toward. And I think the way to that kind of resolution lies through a reclamation of the full dimensions of gendered identity by both women and men. Only in this way can a dominant gender avoid the projection of personal and collective shadow on the other, whether that other is male or female. Only in this way can a member of either sex discover and affirm a full and authentic identity, claiming strengths, owning weaknesses, freeing creative energy, and taking responsibility for its consequences. We will not then ask of the other that he or she complete us, justify our existence, confer upon us an identity which in truth only the self can empower and direct. We might find ourselves with less to hide, less to envy, free to be truly companions one with another. This is relevant. I hope for this development not only in our outer relationships, but also and crucially in our dealings with the inner other, with the anima, or with the animus. If we treat the emergence, the figures that we discover in the unconscious of the other sex, if we treat them as authorities, we will lose our own. And this very day, I had a young woman who's been in analysis for a very long time present me with a dream which suggested that this animus figure was not an authority. He told her, in fact, that she knew more than he did. And she was put off by that. And we talked about it, and she said, but I thought the animus was supposed to be, we've been working together for a long time, an authority, a power, a guide. Well, a guide in a certain way, but quite a little while ago, De Castillejo said that the animus makes a wonderful light bearer. He can focus the light, but you've got to show him where to shine it. And it's something like that I'm talking about. We can talk a little bit more about what, if we don't regard animus as somehow archetypally bearing the qualities that we discern in him, what we can think about that. But we do have contrasexual appearances in our dreams and otherwise. Are there any? Yeah, we got about 10 minutes before we might want to take a break, and then I want to get to images. I saw people sort of fading away. I have to apologize for the fact that this was written. Ordinarily, I don't do my presentations from.
It's just so rich, you know, it's so great that
Well, okay, well, if all goes as I hope it will, there'll be copies of it available at some point. So, yeah.
There's a reference for, in the first part of this section,
Mhm.
helping us to, is we were talking about energy.
Yes. Imagine how happy I was to find that.
Imagining that behind the gendered images is a unified image.
Yes, that's really what I think. That is Collected Works 5, paragraphs 128, 129.
Thank you.
well, I think the way you did make that point, you know, in woman,
Mm-hmm.
again, my gut feeling as I read it was again, if I can recollect it correctly, that again the explanation was the feminine as the unfocused now. And I remember feeling, oh,
Yeah,
really? Well, I guess I've always accepted that's true. But again, each time I read, and usually it was a female disciple and who would, in fact, give more weight
Mm-hmm.
to the gender, the power in the gender. Still, there were the comments and the pulling back into the context. I've been very grateful to a lot of the theoreticians, both male and female, who have tried to open that up and expand it. And to my own feelings, I've learned to trust that unfocused are in reaction to it. And part of it is that my unfocused is not really just some kind of spin-off, you know, as though it's chaotic. I would like to see some different terms that embody that, yes, whether it's feminine or female or the left side or however, that would give the implication that there is this other quality without using our pejorative vocabulary, because it still seems to me that so much of it is supposed to be descriptive, but my goodness, I don't like feel. Well, it doesn't just say here is matter that is within a field and that somehow you will synthesize it. It's to me, and again, that may be part of my own projection, but usually if there is something pejorative, well, you just don't know how to get it together, and that's why it's female.
It's vaguely insulting.
It is vaguely insulting, yes. That's
That-
exactly
that-
what it is.
I have felt that, yeah. Not because I think that, for instance, birth qualities are, body experiences are anything but to be celebrated, but to be limited to that. Or when I read Neumann about the evolution of consciousness, and he says consciousness is masculine. And so, sometimes he qualifies that, and he says, well, but there is a matriarchal consciousness. But then he turns around, and it turns out to be a kind of a way station on the way to the real thing that we've got now, And he says women all have to in order to grow to maturity, to conscious maturity, women have to develop a masculine consciousness. Well, I think that we do perforce develop a lot of the possibilities of what's called masculine, and may really be masculine consciousness, I don't know. But do you see how that's pejorative?
You're taking his male authority.
I'm questioning it now.
I think to develop his female consciousness, I think in my view.
There's a word that you getting left out of it. The idea of focusing in male consciousness becomes synonymous for the God in a way. Are you focused or are you better-headed woman? Is what I keep hearing, and I keep wondering, where in this view of focus and consciousness do they go in peripheral vision?
Yeah, well, that's what I
I
believe.
think that's why it's right. So I'm actually waving my hand because I have seen examples of very effective male focusing in terms of soul orientation and getting something done. 4 or 5 people are lying in the peripheral vision range.
Well, but see, again,
When does unfocused or not male consciousness include peripheral vision as part of its description?
The language as well as the images have come to have connotations, not always exact meaning. And I think that's what we're alluding to, that it isn't necessarily a projection. But when you see that, there is something pejorative about it.
male world and set that up.
well, now listen to this, though. I mean, I don't think, that this is necessarily that I've accepted anybody's definition about what's good or bad. Emma Young says that the masculine is word, will, deed, and meaning. That's masculine. Yeah. That really covers the waterfront pretty much.
You said what you should mean for women.
Well, there's some things that are left, obviously, but but
Well, it was reference to the idea of focused and unfocused, the focused consciousness and diffused consciousness, and I really found that, I always thought of women as being blurry, hazy, unfocused, as in photography, until the first session, which I am, talking about Sophia consciousness, and suddenly, I know I read somewhere, and I don't know if I misinterpreted, the idea of that broader vision.
inclusive rather than exclusive, yes.
And was it written somewhere about the hawk that sees all and only focuses when it finally has a target? But in seeing all, the diffused vision is very sharp. Otherwise, it could not find that target that it aims for. And that was the first release of that idea of hazy, foggy, fuzzy-headed.
I think it's a question of accepting it. It's a question of adding to the opening up to the ritual.
Opening up is what it's about. That's as I see it, yeah.
But as you understand, the way I would experience it, to tell you about that's what I mean. That's the teacher's opinion in the planet. That whenever I do something, I psychologically thread it. Whenever I finally get it together. And
I think that's real
all
common.
of my lovely, wide images that permitted some of that focusing to happen at another time, well, I don't really give her that credit now. The thing that I'm realizing even now as I say it is that I'm putting gender identification on both of those forms of thinking. And what I heard you say tonight is, and you've also said it to me before, but I never understood this clearly, is that both of those forms of thinking are coming through this arch that you define for me. They're both coming out, and the man, meanwhile, has both kinds of thinking coming out of his arch because it comes out of the self. And I think that is an essential difference from what we hear or experience. So then we don't have to sort of defend diffused thinking because the male also has that. And we have a man right here in this audience, the only one, so we know all who he is, who has spent his time building a camera to get that wider vision. So we don't have any claim on that any more than that focus has a claim of maleness.
That's what I feel. Now, that there is otherness, is an exciting reality, and but we need to remove what definitions we've learned so that we can experience that exciting reality directly, as well as our own. Yeah. Let me give you a dream. I can tell you this one because it was mine. So, a while back, when some of this began to dawn on me, I had a night of about 4 dreams all around the same theme. In one, I was in a restaurant and I wanted to leave, and the waiter wouldn't bring me my check. And I just was all over the I couldn't leave. And another one, I was in the bottom of a parking garage, that kind where you go round and round the spiral. And it was time to go, but the man would not bring me my ticket. So I was going around feeling frustrated. The most telling one, though, was that I had been offered an opportunity to participate in a experimental colony, living and working on Mars, an experimental colony. And I turned to the man with whom I was in relationship, and I said, "Oh, but will you have anything interesting to do there?" And he just looked sad. And I said, "Oh, well, our relationship is more important to me than this opportunity, so if you won't go, I won't go." Next thing, I am on Mars, in an observation bubble, and I'm looking out at the activity going on out there, people going about this wonderful new exploratory new reality. They're exploring and developing a new kind of community and so on. And I felt such a yearning to breathe that air. I can still remember how that felt. And I said to the woman who was in charge about it, and she said, "That is only for people who are committed to it. You're here only as a visitor." And I woke up, and the first thing I did as a good Jungian was say, "My relationship to the masculine is not good." They wouldn't come along with me. Huh? What in the world can I do about this, I'm as friendly as I can be to those guys. I give them every opportunity. Why won't they shape up, And then it dawned on me, and this was all, pretty much between, almost still between waking and sleeping. No, it's up to me. If I want to leave the parking garage, I've got to go up there and demand my ticket. If they won't give it to me, I'm going to leave without it. I have to commit myself to this exploration. And if he wants to come with me, wonderful. But if he won't, I can't pass this up. Right? I can't not move to this new place. Now, if it's up to me, and then the next thing I thought was, oh my God. I mean, even the masculine in the dream, this business about giving them credit. So, that was a beginning kind of thing. I will tell you one more dream of mine because it also is important for my way of seeing this. When I was beginning to write, I had a dream in which I was on a treasure hunt with other people, and particularly with a young blonde man who was my close companion. We embraced, confirming our special relationship. We were looking for a treasure, which is difficult to find because the landscape has been altered. But I somehow know that if we follow this river to the source, we will find the treasure. And so we do, and as we approach the place where the treasure is to be, what is there but a place of purification for men and women, and with separate entrances. And I woke up at that point and I thought, I'm a great friend of traditional separatism. But then I began to realize that what it was saying to me was kind of a confirmation of ideas that were rattling around in me anyway. That to discover the treasure of the self requires this separation and purification. Now I must enter the feminine door to do that. Now what may lie beyond that, I don't know. So, okay, let's take a real short break, about 7 minutes. Have to know how to do that.
Turn you on. Now you're on.
Nancy, I think, mentioned, maybe last time, I don't know, some images from the Southwest. This is a sculptor who is one of her favorites, I believe, and who has made some very powerful feminine.
I mentioned it after Julie showed the picture of the Black Madonna, the Black Goddess, that she had had for. And I had spent many hours talking to Caroline about the feminine self, or the goddess, or whatever it is. This is the one that I found that is just terribly important to me. It's the feminine image holding the vessel, which is the symbol of the feminine. And I loved it because it wasn't just the mother and child, which you so frequently find.
As here.
And the other one that he does that I love is women in friendship.
Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, these are, well, how big did you saw this one? They're all around this big, out of black rock.
Give my eye teeth. If you'd accept them.
They're all black.
No.
Anyway, this thing can be easily passed around. His name is Alan Hauser. He's an Indian. And there's one other thing that I would like to share. There's another one at the basement. Another way of looking at the shape of woman holding a vessel.
That kind. This one over here is lovely too. Is that feminine also? Yes, young Apache maiden. There is an Apache Cory. Huh? Yeah, well, I brought some fairly disparate possibilities for the feminine, since my theme is multiplicity. You can see this is from, well, it's a reproduction, of course, but it's Mayan, or at least pre-Columbian, of a goddess and a child. This is, you'll recognize, medieval, again, a reproduction of Mary and Christ, and each one holding an orb, the world, the self. This, of course, is Kuan Yin, and is an image of feminine grace and power, which is not maternal, necessarily. This is from Mexico. This is all done in yarn, and it's an image of creative power. There is the vessel, and there is the pouring forth of power. Now, I don't know whether this figure is intended to be feminine or masculine. It might be the shaman, but there's a distinct resonance for me between this image and some primitive Kali figures that have hair going like that. So, and the vibrance of the color I like. So, yeah, that's another of the dark. That's right, dark. Well, the names of the goddesses are very, very many, and her attributes cover the spectrum of human possibilities for imagination and enactment. And for the sake of balance only in our conception of the feminine, I'd like to mention just a few who plainly demonstrate qualities we're accustomed to consider masculine. I want to emphasize again that those qualities which are traditionally considered feminine are important, and we do experience them. But that's not all. As for instance, feminine order and ordering qualities. Vimarsha Shakti in India is a deliberating, planning, reasoning out the evolution of creation. Vimarsha Shakti. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. I could write these down maybe. I carry my equipment with me. Okay. Whoops. Vimarsha Shakti. Shakti is the feminine energy. The name for the feminine energy. Goddess in India. Metis. M-E-T-I-S. In India? I don't know. But Shakti definitely is. I've heard that enough to know. Shakti and Shiva. Is there a... Yeah, there's a resonance among a lot of these. And that's... Metis was or Metis, however it's pronounced. You can see the relation to measure, just in the name. Is a Greek goddess who was swallowed by Zeus. And in fact was the mother of Athena. But when Metis was pregnant with Athena, Zeus swallowed her. And then Athena was born out of his head. Fully armed. The name means prudent counsel, measured order. And of course there's Athena. I don't need to write her down. The goddess of civilized arts and order. Inanna, whom some of you have recently been reading, called the mistress of May, M-E, that word again, of the ordering principles, talents, potentialities, and rights of civilization. Sophia, the primal world order, ruling equally in the non-human creation and in the sphere of human society. Isis, who gave and ordained the laws for men, divided the earth from heaven, showed the paths of the stars, ordered the course of the sun and the moon. One of her appellations is Thesmophorus. I'll write that down, which means lawgiver. That's also a term sometimes given to Demeter. Maat, M-A-A-T, the Egyptian. You can see the relation between some of these. The Egyptian goddess who stood for the right order in nature and society as established by the act of creation. We may do a little, maybe, possible comparison between kinds of order if we go on long enough. The feminine as discriminating consciousness. Kali, in this appearance called Prajnaparamita, which means without origin and without end, the sphere of transcending awareness which is experienced by and in ourselves. And again, Sophia, who says of herself, I am wisdom. My neighbor is intelligence. I am found in company with knowledge and thought. I am discernment and the strength that goes with it. Discernment. Discernment. And again, Isis, who devised the sacred, that is the hieroglyphic and demotic letters assigned to the various people their various languages. Goddess of the Word. This last was Isis. And we are always hearing about the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. Well, there have been Sky Mothers. There was Nut, that's N-U-T, who was the mother of Isis and Nephthys and Seth and Osiris, the four major gods in one telling of the Egyptian mythology. Sometimes you see a picture of her with her consort Geb, who is Earth Father in this imagining. And he's lying flat on his back, and she's arched over him. He has a huge erection that manages to bridge the gap. Again, Sophia of the sky. Philo called her God's archetypal luminary. and said that our sun is the image and copy of her. In the Wisdom of Solomon, she's called the Spirit of God, appearing as mist or breath. And it says that she's above all the constellations of the stars, being composed with light. She is found to be before it. The feminine as dark is not the whole story. Isis, again, penetrates everything by means of the sun's rays. The sun. The principle of those that dwell in heaven. She has greater ties, according to Engelsman, who wrote the book about the feminine dimension of Atargatis, of the three realms, that is, the sky, the earth, and the underworld. As the sky, she appears with a cloud-like veil and with eagles round her head. And of course there was Mary, Queen of Heaven, who often is represented with the circle of stars over her head. In Egypt again was Bast, B-A-S-T, whose other side was called Sekhmet, S-E-K-H-M-E-T. The Bast form was a benevolent, softer form. Sekhmet was a lion-headed goddess. Bast appears with a cat head. It's more of a pussycat. But they are associated with both the fertilizing and destructive power of the sun. Active goddesses. There is Kali, who is the energy by which the absolute becomes manifest. And a hymn addressed to her says, "Thyself without beginning, thou art the beginning of all, creatrix, protectress, and destructress." Putting those feminine things on the end is awkward. She creates, she protects, and she destroys. Again, Sophia. In the Wisdom of Solomon it says, "She, though but one, has the power to do all things, and remaining in herself, renews all things. She is all-powerful, all-surveying, more mobile than any motion." Ishtar, mistress of heaven, directress of mankind, in a hymn it is said to her, "Thou art mighty, thou hast sovereign power, framer of all decrees, wearer of the crown of dominion." And again Isis, who is credited with the creation and establishment of language, laws, justice, war, religion, and morality. That covers the field. Okay, again, as I say, those qualities which in the Jungian thought, and I think pretty generally in the culture, tend to have been announced as being masculine. I might add that, well, maybe I'll get to that later. I suggested that there are gods who embody, who represent, who express qualities that we are accustomed to consider feminine, or to associate with the feminine. And I'll mention some of them before we're through. But there are moon gods, there are earth gods, there are vegetation gods, there are passive gods. And we resurrected some of these possibilities in Christ, but his femininity has seemed a scandal to some. I know of two goddesses in whom, entire, under one name, the whole creative range of divine and human possibility is expressed, and these two are Kali and Isis. There may well be others, I'm sure there are. In fact, I think if you dig into any one of these major goddesses that I have alluded to, and look at all the appellations and all the powers and all the attributions, you will see that they approach the whole. Now, I have spoken at some length of Kali in other classes, and if there's time, I may talk about her some more tonight, because she is one of my favorite experiences. And she's the one great goddess whose organized worship goes on today in India. And further, she requires us to confront the dark side of divinity and of ourselves a little more directly and more intensely than Isis does. However, Isis comes closer to a human dimension in the stories that are told about her troubles and her triumphs, and she has a great deal to give us. Her worship spanned thousands of years, from the earliest to the latest dynasties of Egypt and into Roman times. Apuleius, as a Roman writer known to Jungians through his treatment of the Amor Psyche myth, experienced her mysteries, and he composed this prayer to her. "Holiest of the holy, perpetual comfort of mankind, you whose bountiful grace nourishes the whole world, whose heart turns toward all those in sorrow and tribulation as a mother's to her child." So far, it could be Mary In fact, prayers have been couched in very similar terms. He goes on, however, the gods above adore you. The gods below do homage to you. You set the orb of heaven spinning round the poles. You give light to the sun. You govern the universe. You trample down the powers of hell. At your voice the stars move, the seasons recur. The spirits of earth rejoice. The elements obey. I will keep your divine countenance always before my eyes, and the secret knowledge of your divinity locked deep in my heart. Now, Isis was the great and beneficent goddess and mother, whose power and love pervaded all heaven and earth and the abode of the dead. She was the personification of the great feminine creative power which conceived and brought forth every living creature and thing, from the gods in heaven to human beings to the insect on the ground. What she brought forth, she protected, cared for, nourished. She used her power graciously and successfully, not only in creating new beings, but in restoring those that were dead. This theme of death and rebirth is, somebody said, whenever you are, I don't know if it was Campbell or somebody, but anytime you are in the presence of transformation mysteries that talk about death and rebirth, you are in the presence of the feminine. I don't know, it's interesting. Everywhere in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Isis is regarded as the giver of life and food to the dead. And in one of her aspects, she appears as a judge of the dead. Among her general titles may be mentioned the Divine One, the Only One, the greatest of the gods and goddesses, the Queen of all gods, Opener of the Year, Lady of the New Year, Maker of the Sunrise, Lady of Heaven, Light Giver of Heaven, Lady of the North Wind, Queen of the Earth, Most Mighty One, Queen of the South and North. That was the whole thing in Egypt, the Southern Kingdom and the Northern Kingdom. Lady of the solid earth, Lady of warmth and fire, she who is greatly feared, the Lady of life, Lady of green crops, the green goddess, Lady of bread, Lady of beer, Lady of abundance, Lady of joy and gladness, Lady of love, the maker of kings, the Lady of words of power, Lady of the shuttle, wife of the Lord of the abyss, wife of the Lord of the inundation, that was Osiris, the creatrix of the Nile flood, which was, of course, the life-giving force in Egypt. In fact, at a comparatively early period in Egyptian history, Isis had absorbed the attributes of all the great primitive goddesses and of all the local goddesses, of which there are hundreds in ancient Egypt, including Net, Bast, Hathor, and so forth. I'll say more about some of those. And she was even identified as the primeval abyss of water from which sprang all life. I incidentally got a certain amount about Isis from E.T.A. Budge. It's a 2-volume work on the gods and goddesses, or the mythology of ancient Egypt. Budge. Oh, wait, I think I have it here, as a matter of fact. See if I got that right. And these things were published in 1903. The gods of the... E.A. Wallace Budge. I got the Budge right. The Gods of the Egyptians, Studies in Egyptian Mythology. Couldn't get him to budge. With 229 illustrations, including 6 in full color. And because he is a Victorian gentleman, I think English originally, he tends to settle on, I won't go into this, in spite of all that he has to say about the goddess and various of the goddesses being perceived as the source, the creatrix, and so on. When he devotes a chapter to the creation myth of the Egyptians, it's a relative late development with Ra, of course, the sun god, at the head of the thing. And he says, I did it all myself, in a way that we're familiar with hearing from, from Jehovah. He did it from his mouth, which I think is displacement upward. I don't know. Well, yes, all of these things. And he says, from what has been said above, it is manifestly impossible to limit the attributes of Isis. It is. Her worship spread from Egypt into several places in Western Europe, and she was identified by Greeks and Romans with certain of their gods, including Persephone, Athena, Ceres, Venus, Proserpine, who's the Roman Persephone. Moreover, some of her attributes appeared again in the Virgin Mary, and the pictures and sculptures wherein she is represented in the act of suckling her child Horus. in Budge's view, formed the foundation for the Christian figures and paintings of the Madonna and Child. Now, he sees a historical connection, and he may well be right, because these images were all over Egypt and Christianity went there. But here's another one. You know, this pre-Columbian mother and child, and this is an image which doesn't have to be transmitted historically. It comes up from beneath and reappears. In any case, several of the incidents of the Apocrypha reflect scenes in the life of Isis. And indeed, some writers believe that the worship of Osiris and Isis and Horus, they were the triumvirate. She was the wife of Osiris and the mother of Horus. That because of the quality of that worship and the stories that were told and the images that went with it, that this was so prevalent in Egypt really prepared the way for Christianity. Made it easy for the people to accept Christianity. It's another dying and reborn God, for one thing, and the mother. In certain places in the south of Egypt, the worship of Osiris and Isis was maintained until the beginning of the 5th century A.D. But at this period, in all other parts of Egypt, Mary the Virgin and Christ had taken the place of Isis and Horus, and the God-mother, or mother of the god, which is what Isis was called, was no longer Isis, but Mary, styled Theotokos. Now, the situation, one of the things that I was pleased about in reading these, besides the fact that he's got a lot of he's got hieroglyphics which are fun to look at, but he's got the translations direct from them, and a lot of early translations too, and he deals at much greater length, in much greater detail with Egyptian religion than I've ever come across. You look in a mythology sort of encyclopedia thing, and you'll hear about Hathor, and you'll see pictures and some of the others, but the immense richness and duplication and the thousands of names that each of these goddesses were known by, and how, even though they might be called Hathor or Net or Bast or Sekhet or I don't know how many others, the same things are said. The same spread of power and creativity and qualities are attributed.
Why was it due to the lack of mobility of the people
in the old times? I don't know. It could, yeah, it's possible. There's a similar kind of thing, of course, in India. Yeah, so that there would be, right. And then as the civilization grew and the cities are connected, they still are, Isis with the name of the town, or Hathor with the name of the town. It's like each layer absorbed the more ancient stuff that came through. And there's this multiplicity, but underneath it, you see, and that's what I love. I love both. I love the multiplicity and the oneness. It's all there. One of Isis' major forerunners, and forerunner in the sense that she was older, but also she was coexistent with the worship of Isis, was Hathor, who is often represented as a great cow with the stars of the night on her belly. She's the sky. In fact, her name means house above, which is to say the sky or the heavens. And her worship dates to pre-dynastic times. They have found those early flint implements with the signs meaning Hathor, or the images. She was a cosmic goddess when she was first known, called the Mother of Light, the birth of which was the first act of creation. She was also called Lady of the Holy Land, that is to say of the underworld. She was the great mother of the world, and you recognize the similarity to Holly here, perpetually conceiving and bringing forth and rearing and receiving again of the dead. In fact, Budge said it was quite impossible for any worshiper of Hathor, however devout, to enumerate all the forms of the goddess which existed. Later, the Greeks would identify her with Aphrodite, and she was indeed the patron of all singers, dancers, and merrymakers of every kind, of beautiful women and of love, of artists and artistic works, and also of the vine and wine and ale and beer, and in fact of joy and happiness and everything which contributed thereto. She was, in a later imagining, born of the goddess Nut, another one of the sky goddesses, in the form of a black-skinned or blackish-red-skinned child, which of course made me think of the Black Madonnas. Identified often with Hathor and later with Isis was Bast, Sekhmet, or Sekhet is another way of spelling it that I mentioned before. The Sekhmet personified the burning, fiery, and destructive heat of the sun, and Bast represented the milder heat which encouraged growth and germination. Or, as Sekhet, with a lioness head, she symbolized the sunlight, but as Bast, with the head of a cat, she was associated with the moon. There is that element also. Bast was regarded as exercising a special influence with pregnant women. And Isis, Hathor, Bast, Sekhet was also invoked as Net, who in some writings is called the One, who said, I have come from myself. And at whose shrine was inscribed the following, which also has been attributed to a shrine of Isis, and I suppose all of them. I am everything which hath been, and which is, and which shall be, and there hath never been any who hath discovered what lies behind my veil. That is the ultimate mystery of the self, more ever than you can imagine. Well, the stories about Isis. She was born, as I mentioned, of Nut at the same time as Osiris and Set and Nephthys, her sister. Foursome, two masculine, two feminine. And it is said that Osiris and Isis enjoyed one another while yet in the womb. Brother, sister, who are also husband and wife. Osiris is said to have, in fact, both of these, Osiris and Isis, and I think that's another reason that the blend with Christianity was made easy, are treated very much like human beings with stories on earth. And Osiris is said to have gone about, teaching the arts of civilization and teaching the people to worship the gods. And then he went abroad to spread the word to other countries, and Isis reigned alone. Now, his brother Set, also called Typhon, and associated with the raging heat of the desert, a destructive power. Set and Osiris are like the dark and the light sides, or the life and death dealing sides of the deity. And they are enemies. And one day, Set has a party for the company of gods, and has made a plot to do away with his brother. He constructs a coffin which is just Osiris' size and no one else's. And when the company is gathered, he says, look at what this beautiful thing I've made. I'll give it to whomever it fits. And everybody tries, and it doesn't fit anybody. And then Osiris gets in, and they clamp the lid on him and shove him into the Nile. And he goes, he's carried off to the sea and lost. Then when, and in some of the stories, he also captured Isis and sort of imprisoned her. But she breaks out ultimately and goes in search of Osiris. Now, let's see, what is her name? One of the early Jungian writers on women that wrote Feminine Mist, Harding, yeah. And I've forgotten which of her books it is. But she's got some real nice stuff about Isis. That's it, Women's Mysteries, yeah. And I think in the back of that book is one of Isis' laments. And I didn't have time to dig it out, but it's very poignant as she searches for her lost love. And she goes all over and finally lands on the shores of a far land and is taken, did she see it there? I don't know, but anyway, that's where it had washed up indeed, and it had been caught in the branches of a tamarisk tree, and the king of the land and the tamarisk had grown up around it and enclosed it. And the king was struck with the beauty of this tree, and he took it home and made a post for his house. And somehow Isis discovers this. I think she goes there, and there's a kind of an echo here of the Demeter story. And this is one of the later stories about Isis, I think. She takes service in the household of the king as a nurse for his child, and she suckles the child with her finger, and she dips the child in the fire each night to give it immortality. And as in the story of Demeter, the mother appears one night and says, "Oh my God, what are you doing to my child?" And thereby loses the chance of immortality for her son. Then Isis reveals who she is and asks for the tamarind tree, and they give it to her, and she starts home with it. And she opens it up and weeps over it. Now, the stories vary about this time, but Set enters the picture again and takes Osiris and cuts him up into 14 pieces and scatters him all over Egypt. And then again, Isis is searching for the pieces, and in one story she gathers them all together. In one of the versions, wherever she finds one, she plants it, and there's a temple raised to Osiris. In another one, she gathers it all together, but she cannot find the phallus. And in one of the stories, she carves one out of wood, and herself, with her wings, breathes life into the dead Osiris, and conceives a child by him with the aid of the phallus she made. So then Horus is born, and then Set is after Horus. There's a whole long, and they have to hide out in the swamps, and it's like the evil King Herod searching for the infant king, with the difference that her notion is to raise Horus so that he can revenge his father. And she saves him and other people with her words of power from the stings of scorpions, and finally Horus in fact does battle with Set and defeats him. But at the time that he would destroy Set, Isis intervenes. Now, a certain amount is made out of that by some writers that he is her brother, and this is the remains of the matriarchal power structure. That the brother of the mother is the important one, and that at this crucial point in which Horus, who's the new sun god, might take over, she doesn't want to lose her brother's power. Horus is infuriated, and he and his mother then battle, and he defeats his mother. Now there are some, and cuts off her head in one thing, or rips off her crown in another version of the story, and there are some who see this as imaging the turn from the power of matriarchy to the power of patriarchy, at least in religion. But her brother, Isis, another brother, gives her another head. And she continues to reign. So now, you see, in these stories, which were ones which greatly endeared her, it is said, to the Egyptian people, she appears as the ideal wife and mother, loyal and true, and taking care of husband and son. But the thing that has always struck me about it was her long... See, when I first read this, I was in Zurich, and I was going through this thing of trying to get in good contact with the animus, and having some concern about my relationship, in the outer world. Where can one meet for this full kind of co-equal mating, co-creative intimacy, which is the ideal, and which is sort of emblematic in this story of the brother and sister who are born together and lovers together. They are equal. And I read Isis' lament and her search, and her ongoing search, and the success with which she was crowned finally. And at that time, it occurred to me that I cannot expect to have this kind of meeting with the masculine unless I am a daughter of the goddess. Unless I know that power in myself, there can't be that kind of co-creative coming together. Later on, of course, I realized this latter part of the story that I mentioned about her creating the phallus herself. And that reminded me, of course, of my dream. You have to do it yourself, somehow. And then the co-creating possibility is there. You can't just wait and mourn and hope and search. You have to do something yourself. So. Yeah. I can, well, so.
It reminds me of Denver is mourning and carrying on at such a great rate, and the little Bobo comes and pulls up her skirts and sort of,
yes.
Get on with it. That's true.
Yeah, so, of course, all the ancient, or some of the very old images of feminine deity, they are displaying their genitals, and it's a sign of power, very much like, the phallic pillar is supposed to be. And in India, again, there's the what is it called? Lingam, right. And they appear together.
I had read in here that they considered these were actually scripted and produced, that they considered the first miracle.
Yes.
Power of
Yes, in fact, Budge quotes early writers who have witnessed that, and he's got descriptions of some of the early rituals which were open to the public, and of Isis and Bast and